I was born Eleanor Grace Whitmore. But to my family, I was always the mistake. The unwanted shadow in a house of polished marble and sharper tongues. My earliest memory is not of love or warmth but of my mother's voice. Low and venomous. Hissing to my father that I was a burden they never planned for. My older siblings, Clara and Victor, absorbed that disdain like gospel. Their eyes slicing through me as if I were a stain on their perfect lineage. The Whitmores were old money, draped in prestige. Their name etched into the city's history like a monument. I was the crack in that monument. The flaw they couldn't erase but refused to acknowledge. By the time I was 10, I had learned to shrink, to make myself small enough to avoid their scorn. But no matter how quiet I was, how carefully I tiptoed through their world, I could never escape the label they pinned to me, the family mistake. Growing up in that cold, sprawling mansion on the hill, I clung to fragments of affection wherever I could find them. There was Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, who slipped me extra slices of bread when no one was looking. Her warm hands a fleeting comfort. There was my father's study, a forbidden sanctuary where I'd sneak in to read his leather-bound books, losing myself in stories of heroes who overcame impossible odds. But those moments were stolen, always interrupted by Clara's sneers or Victor's cruel pranks, locking me in the attic, hiding my shoes, whispering that I didn't belong. My parents never intervened. Father was too busy with his investments. Mother with her social galas. I was an afterthought, a problem they wished would vanish. By 16, I understood that love in our family was a currency, and I was bankrupt. Clara, with her porcelain beauty and sharp wit, was the golden child, destined for a glittering marriage. Victor, with his charm and ambition, was the heir apparent, groomed to inherit the Whitmore empire. I was the spare, the accident, the one they forgot to invite to family portraits. But I wasn't invisible to everyone. At school, I found solace in Mr. Langley, my literature teacher, who saw something in me my family never did. He encouraged me to write, to pour my pain into words, to dream beyond the walls of that suffocating house. "You're not a mistake, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice steady. "You're a story waiting to be told." Those words became my lifeline. When I turned 18, I left. I didn't run away in a dramatic flourish. I simply packed a single bag and walked out while the family was at one of Mother's charity balls. No one noticed. I moved to a small apartment in the city, worked odd jobs, and put myself through college. I studied literature, then law, driven by a quiet fire to prove I was more than their whispers. I built a life, brick by brick, far from the Whitmore name. I became a lawyer, not the kind who chased wealth, but the kind who fought for the voiceless people like the girl I used to be. I thought I'd left the past behind, buried it beneath years of hard-won independence. But the past has a way of clawing its way back. It was a rainy Tuesday when I got the call. My father was dead. A heart attack, sudden and final, in the middle of a board meeting. I hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. Not since the day I left. The voice on the phone was Clara's, crisp and businesslike, as if she were scheduling a dentist appointment. "You need to come to the reading of the will," she said. "It's tomorrow. Don't be late." No grief, no warmth, just an order. I almost hung up. But something stopped me, a flicker of curiosity. Or maybe a need to face them one last time. I agreed, my voice steady despite the storm brewing in my chest. The Whitmore mansion hadn't changed. The same iron gates. The same manicured lawns. The same air of untouchable superiority. Clara greeted me at the door, her smile as sharp as broken glass. Victor stood behind her, taller than I remembered, his eyes scanning me like I was a stranger applying for a job. Mother sat in the parlor, a vision in black silk, her face a mask of composed grief. They didn't ask about my life, my career, my world. They didn't need to. I was still the mistake. And that was all they saw. The lawyer, a nervous man with a trembling voice. Read the will. Father's fortune, millions in assets. Properties. Stocks was split evenly between Clara and Victor. To me, he left a single item, a gold pocket watch, engraved with his initials. It was a trinket, token, a final reminder that I was worth less than nothing to him. I held the watch in my hand, its weight heavier than gold. Clara smirked, whispering to Victor about charity cases. Mother's eyes flicked to me, then away, as if I were a speck of dust. Something broke inside me that day, not my heart, but my silence. I'd spent my life running from their cruelty, but now I saw it for what it was, a wound they'd carved into me, one I'd let fester too long. I left the mansion without a word, the watch burning a hole in my pocket. That night, in my small apartment, I made a decision. They thought they could erase me, but I would show them what a mistake could do. I would build something greater than their empire. And when the time came, I'd make sure they felt the weight of their own dismissal. The watch ticked on my desk, counting down to a reckoning I hadn't yet named. I threw myself into my work with a ferocity I didn't know I had. My law firm, small but fierce, became my battlefield. I took on cases no one else wanted, families cheated by corporations, tenants crushed by landlords, workers betrayed by systems that favored the powerful. Each victory was a brick in the foundation of my new life. Each client a reminder that I could make a difference. I didn't need the Whitmore name to matter, but the memory of that day in the mansion, the cold dismissal in their eyes, fueled me. I wasn't just building a career. I was forging a weapon. I started investing, quietly at first, using every spare dollar to buy into startups. Real estate, anything with potential. I studied markets the way I once studied novels, learning their rhythms, their secrets. Slowly, my wealth grew, not Whitmore wealth, but mine, earned through sweat and sleepless nights. Years passed, and I became a name in my own right. Eleanor Grace, the lawyer who never lost, the investor with a golden touch. The media called me a self-made enigma, a title I wore like armor. I didn't seek the spotlight, but it found me. Invitations to galas and charity events piled up, but I rarely attended. I had no interest in the world my family ruled. Still, whispers reached me: Clara's marriage to a senator, Victor's rise in the family business, Mother's endless social climbing. They were thriving, or so it seemed. But I heard other whispers too, cracks in their empire, bad investments, lawsuits. The Whitmore name wasn't as untouchable as they thought. One evening, as I sipped coffee in my office, a letter arrived. It was from Victor, handwritten, a rarity in our digital age. His words were polite, almost warm, but I knew better. He invited me to a family dinner, a reunion to heal old wounds. I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. Heal? They didn't want healing. They wanted something. I considered ignoring it. But curiosity, or maybe that same fire from years ago, made me respond. I arrived at the mansion on a crisp autumn night, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves. Clara was there, her beauty sharper with age, her eyes calculating. Victor was all charm, offering me wine as if we were old friends. Mother sat at the head of the table, her gaze distant but watchful. Dinner was a performance. They spoke of father's legacy, of the family's unbreakable bond, as if I'd been part of it. Then Victor leaned forward, his smile too perfect. Eleanor, we've heard about your success. Impressive. Really. We're thinking of expanding the family trust, and we'd love your perspective. There it was, the reason for the invitation. They didn't want me. They wanted my money, my connections, my name. I played along, nodding, asking questions, letting them think I was softened by their flattery. But inside, I was carving a plan. They'd underestimated me before, and they were doing it again. I left that night with a promise to consider their proposal. Instead, I dug deeper. I hired investigators, discreet but thorough, to uncover the truth about the Whitmore empire. What I found was a house of cards debts hidden behind shell companies, lawsuits settled out of court, whispers of fraud. Victor had overplayed his hand, sinking millions into failing ventures. Clara's senator husband was embroiled in a scandal, his campaign funds dwindling. Mother's charity was a front, its books cooked to siphon money for her lifestyle. They were desperate, and I was their lifeline. The irony was almost too perfect. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Kept building, kept winning, kept growing my empire. By my 40th birthday, I was worth more than the Whitmores ever were. A fact I kept quiet but savored. I bought a house, not a mansion, but a home, warm and filled with books, a place that felt like mine. I adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt I named Langley after my old teacher. I found friends, real ones, who knew me as Eleanor, not the mistake. But the past wasn't done with me. A second letter came, this time from Clara, her tone less polite, more urgent. We need to talk, Eleanor. It's important. For the family. I crumpled the letter, but the fire in me burned brighter. They wanted my help. They'd get something else entirely. The second dinner was different. The mansion felt heavier. Its grandeur faded, like a painting left too long in the sun. Clara's smile was strained. Victor's charm frayed at the edges. Mother's eyes held a flicker of something new, fear. Maybe. Or desperation. They didn't waste time on pleasantries. Victor spoke first, his voice tight. Eleanor, the family business is struggling. We need an investor. Someone we can trust. Clara chimed in, her words dripping with false warmth. Your family, after all. We'd rather keep this in-house. I sipped my wine, letting their words hang in the air. They thought I was their savior, but I was their judge. I asked questions, probing gently, watching their faces. Victor's hands twitched when I mentioned the lawsuits. Clara's laugh was too sharp when I asked about the senator. Mother's silence was loudest of all. I left that night with a promise to think it over. But I already knew my answer. I didn't owe them anything, not my money, not my loyalty, not my forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt all those years, the sting of being dismissed, the weight of being unwanted. I wanted justice, not just for me, but for the girl I'd been, the one they'd tried to erase. Back in my office, I pored over the investigators' reports. The Whitmore empire was crumbling faster than I'd thought. Victor had borrowed against assets he didn't fully own. Clara's husband was facing an ethics investigation, his career teetering. Mother's charity was under audit, its donors pulling out. They were drowning, and they thought I'd throw them a lifeline. Instead, I started buying quietly, through proxies, shares in their companies, properties they'd leveraged, debts they couldn't pay. I didn't want to destroy them. Not exactly. I wanted them to see me, to know what I'd become despite them. I wanted them to beg. Months passed, and I kept my distance, letting them stew. Clara called, then Victor, their voices sharper each time. Eleanor, we're family, Clara said, as if the word held magic. We need you now. I smiled into the phone, promising nothing. By the time I agreed to a third meeting, I owned enough of their world to tip the scales. The mansion was colder this time, the air thick with tension. Victor was drinking too much, his words slurring. Clara's nails dug into her palms, leaving crescent marks. Mother looked at me, really looked, for the first time in years. You've done well, Eleanor, she said, her voice soft but edged. We're proud of you. I almost laughed. Proud. They didn't know the meaning of the word. I laid out my terms. I'd invest, but only if they gave me control. A seat on the board, veto power, transparency. Victor's face reddened. Clara's eyes narrowed. But they had no choice. They agreed, reluctantly, thinking they could outmaneuver me later. They didn't know I already held the cards. Over the next year, I rebuilt their empire not for them, but through them. I cleaned up their messes, paid off their debts, restored their name. But every move was calculated, every decision a step toward my endgame. I didn't want their gratitude. I wanted their acknowledgement. I wanted them to see the mistake they'd made. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. The board meeting where I revealed my hand. I owned the majority of their shares, their properties, their future. Victor's jaw dropped. Clara's face paled. Mother's hands trembled. You can't do this, Victor stammered. We're family. I leaned forward, my voice steady. You called me the mistake. I'm just living up to it. I didn't take everything. I left them enough to survive barely. The mansion, the name, a fraction of their wealth. But control, that was mine. I walked out, the gold pocket watch in my hand. It's ticking louder than their protests. The aftermath was quiet, but it roared in my chest. I'd won, but victory tasted bitter. The Whitmores were humbled. their empire no longer theirs. But I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. I went back to my life-me firm, my home, my dog, but the watch sat on my desk. A reminder of what I'd done. I'd taken their power, but I hadn't erased the past. The girl they'd hurt was still inside me, still waiting for something I couldn't name. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger cases, riskier investments, anything to drown out the questions. Had I gone too far? Was this justice? Or was it revenge? Clara called first, her voice shaking. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Please." I ignored her. Victor's emails followed, long and rambling, promising apologies, partnerships, anything to regain what they'd lost. I deleted them. Mother sent a letter, her handwriting elegant but unsteady. "You've proven your point," she wrote. "Come home." Home. The word was a knife. That mansion had never been home. Not for me. I burned the letter, but her words lingered. I'd wanted them to see me, but now that they had, what was left? I started dreaming of the mansion again, not as it was now, but as it had been when I was a child. The attic where Victor locked me, the dining room where Clara mocked me, the study where I hid. In my dreams, I was small again, but I wasn't afraid. I was rewriting the story, giving that girl a voice, a strength she hadn't known. But dreams weren't enough. I needed to face them, not as the victor, but as myself. I needed to understand why I'd done this, not just for justice, but for me. I agreed to meet them, one last time. Not in the mansion, but on neutral ground, a quiet cafe downtown. Clara arrived first, her eyes red, her poise cracked. Victor was next, subdued, his arrogance gone. Mother came last, slower than I remembered, her face lined with something deeper than age. They didn't beg or bargain. They just sat there, waiting for me to speak. I didn't know what I wanted to say until the words came. "You made me feel like nothing," I said, my voice low but steady. "You called me a mistake, and I believed you. But I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not your mistake." Clara cried. Victor stared at the table. Mother reached for my hand but stopped short. They didn't apologize. Not directly. But their silence was louder than words. I told them I was done. No more games. No more power plays. I'd keep what I'd earned. But I wouldn't destroy them. Not because they deserved mercy, but because I didn't need their ruin to feel whole. I left the cafe lighter, the watch still in my pocket. It's ticking softer now. Back home, I started writing again. Not cases or contracts, but stories. Stories of a girl who survived, who built, who forgave not them, but herself. I realized that my revenge hadn't been about them. Not really. It had been about proving I was enough. I donated the watch to a charity auction, letting it go with the last of my anger. The Whitmores faded from my life, their name no longer a weight on my shoulders. I was Eleanor Grace, not their mistake, but my own creation. The years that followed were kinder. My firm grew. My name carried weight. But I found joy in smaller things: Langley's wagging tail, coffee with friends, the quiet of my home. I thought I'd closed the book on the Whitmores. But life has a way of rewriting endings. A letter arrived. Not from Clara or Victor, but from a lawyer I didn't know. Mother was dying. Cancer. Fast and merciless. She wanted to see me. I sat with that letter for days, torn between the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. I didn't know her anything, but I went not for her, but for me. The hospital room was stark, the air heavy with antiseptic and regret. Mother looked small, her elegance stripped away by illness. She didn't speak at first, just watched me with eyes that held a lifetime of unsaid words. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. Eleanor, I was wrong. About you. About everything. I waited for anger, for the fire that had driven me all those years. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something softer, sadder. I took her hand, not because I forgave her, but because I could. She died a week later. Clara and Victor were there, their grief raw but distant. We didn't speak much, just stood together in the silence of loss. The funeral was small, the Whitmore name no longer a beacon. I didn't stay long. I had my own life to live, my own story to write. But Mother's words stayed with me, not as absolution, but as a crack in the wall I'd built. I started to wonder if redemption wasn't just for me, but for them too. I kept tabs on Clara and Victor, not out of spite, but curiosity. Clara left the senator, started a small business, something simple, human. Victor sold the mansion, moved to a quieter town, took a job teaching finance. They were trying, in their own broken ways, to rebuild. I didn't reach out, but I didn't hate them anymore. I'd spent so long fighting their shadows that I'd forgotten how to live without them. Now, I was learning. My own life bloomed. I wrote a book, not about the Whitmores, but about a girl who found her own way. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was mine, and that was enough. I mentored young lawyers, shared my wealth with causes that mattered, built a legacy that wasn't about revenge but about possibility. The girl who'd been called a mistake was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth. The Whitmores had shaped me, but they didn't define me. I did. One evening, as I walked Langley through the park, my phone rang. It was Clara, her voice hesitant but clear. Eleanor, can we meet? Just you and me. I almost said no, but something in her Tania vulnerability I'd never heard made me agree. We met at a small diner, far from the world of mansions and galas. She looked different, softer, her hair loose, her eyes tired but honest. I'm sorry, she said, the words heavy. For everything. For how we treated you. I waited for the anger, but it was gone. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She told me about her life, her divorce, her business, her struggle to find meaning. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just understanding. I listened, not as the victor, but as her sister. For the first time, I saw her not as the golden child, but as someone as broken as I'd been. We didn't hug or cry or make promises. We just sat there, two women trying to make sense of the past. When we parted, I felt lighter, not because we'd reconciled, but because I'd let go of something I didn't need anymore. Victor reached out next. A letter this time, not an email. He wrote about his new life, his students, the quiet he'd found. I was wrong about you, Eleanor, he wrote. I wish I'd seen you sooner. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter. I didn't need their apologies, but I was glad they were trying to be better. I was too. I started volunteering at a shelter, helping women like the girl I'd been, showing them they weren't mistakes either. Each story I heard, each life I touched, was a piece of my own redemption. My book gained traction, not for its drama, but for its honesty. Readers wrote to me, sharing their own stories of being overlooked, unwanted, unvalued. I answered every letter, not as a savior, but as someone who understood. I realized that my fight hadn't just been for me, but for all of us who'd been called mistakes. I wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. The years softened the edges of my story. I turned 50, my hair streaked with gray, my heart fuller than I'd ever thought possible. I didn't think about the Whitmores much, but they weren't gone entirely. Clara sent me a card on my birthday, a small gesture that meant more than I expected. Victor invited me to a lecture he was giving, and I went, sitting in the back, watching him teach with a passion I'd never seen. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The war was over. I started writing a second book. This one about family, not the one I was born into, but the one I'd built. My friends, my clients, the women at the shelter. Langley, they were my family now. I realized that loyalty wasn't about blood, but about choice. I'd chosen to be more than the mistake, and I'd chosen to let go of the pain. It wasn't forgiveness. Not exactly, but it was peace. One day, I got a call from my lawyer. I'd never written a will, never thought I needed one. But he pressed, and I relented. Sitting at my desk, I thought about the Whitmores, about the watch, about the empire I'd taken and the life I'd built. I didn't owe them anything, but I didn't hate them either. I left them nothing, not out of spite, but because they didn't need it. My wealth, my legacy, would go to the shelter, to scholarships, to the people who'd never had a chance. The Whitmores had their name, their story. I had mine. On a quiet Sunday, I walked to the park with Langley, the air crisp with the promise of fall. I sat on a bench, watching the world move around me, children laughing, couples walking, life unfolding. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who'd hidden in the shadows of a mansion, and the woman I'd become, the one who'd built her own light. I didn't need the Whitmores anymore, not their approval, not their pain. I was enough. Clara called that evening, her voice soft. Eleanor, I'm proud of you, she said. I smiled, not because I needed her pride, but because I'd found my own. Victor sent a photo of his students. A note scrawled on the back, "You inspired me." I kept it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even broken things can mend. My story wasn't about revenge anymore, or even justice. It was about redemption, not theirs, but mine. I'd made the mistake of letting them define me, but I'd corrected it. And in the end, that was the only will that mattered.